The very first thing you see in Seven is the killer. His hands, close enough to fill the screen, working away before a single detective has spoken a word. Almost no one catches it the first time. That is the strange power of this film. It hides its darkest truths in plain sight and waits, sometimes for years, until you are ready to find them. Watch it once and you get a brilliant, grim detective story. Watch it again and the rain, the warmth, the quiet moments all turn to dread, because now you know what is coming. The story never changes. Your understanding does, and in this world, understanding is never a kind thing to gain. Tonight, slowly and calmly, we will walk back through every shadow this film hides, scene by scene, and uncover why Seven only grows darker the more you watch it. Welcome to Serial Soul. Let's get started. Section 1. A film that was built to be watched twice. The first thing on screen is a pair of hands. They move slowly, almost with care. They cut single words out of a book. They press thread through the spine of a small notebook and stitch it shut. They handle old photographs. They scribble line after line into journals, the writing tight and frantic, like someone trying to get every thought down before it escapes. There is no face attached to these hands. There is no name. The music underneath is a broken, scraping version of a Nine Inch Nails song, and the look of the whole thing is grainy and damaged, like film that has been left out in the rain. For most people watching Seven for the first time, this opening lands as mood and nothing more. A dark little warm-up before the real story starts. Watch the film a second time, or a fifth, and that same opening turns to ice. Those hands belong to the killer. The notebooks being stitched together are his journals, the exact ones the two detectives will later find stacked floor to ceiling in his apartment. The photographs are his planning. The film shows its monster first, calmly, doing his work in close-up, before a single detective has spoken a word. The man everyone spends the next 2 hours trying to find has already been on screen, in plain view, from the very start. The movie simply makes sure that no one knows that is what they're looking at. That space between what a scene appears to be and what it really is runs through the entire film. It is the reason Seven feels heavier each time it is watched. On a first viewing, the story plays like a smart, grim detective movie. A young, hothead detective and an older, tired one chase a clever killer through a rotting city. There is a mystery, there are clues, there is a chase. The brain treats it the way it treats most thrillers, as a puzzle to be solved before the credits roll. The trouble is that the film was never really a puzzle. It was a trap, and the second time through is when the teeth start to show. Begin with the world itself. The city in Seven has no name. It is never placed on a map, never called New York or Chicago or anywhere real. The streets are wet, gray, and crowded with garbage and noise. Rain falls in nearly every outdoor scene, hard and constant, soaking everyone and everything. None of this came from luck or weather. The film was shot in sunny Los Angeles, and the city was dressed and lit to look like a worn-down place somewhere back east. The rain was made by machines on purpose, scene after scene, partly because the filmmakers wanted a world that felt like it was drowning, and partly for a plain practical reason. Brad Pitt was only available for a limited stretch of days, with no room to push the schedule. So building the rain by hand meant a sudden, real storm could never ruin a shot. The constant downpour is one of the first things people remember about the film, and it was a deliberate choice to make the place feel hopeless from the opening minute. A first watch lets that grayness wash past as style. A later watch starts to read it as a warning. The whole world of the film is set up as a place where good things curdle and decent people get worn down. And that mood is not decoration. It is the film quietly telling its audience how this is going to end, long before the end arrives. There is a clock running too, though it hides in plain sight. The older detective, Somerset, is not just any cop. He is 7 days away from retirement when the story begins. He wants out. He is tired of the city and tired of the work. The first murder lands on his first day, and the killings unfold across the days that follow, one after another, each tied to one of the 7 deadly sins. 7 days, 7 sins. One man trying to walk out the door and getting pulled back in with every body that turns up. The shape of the story is built right into the calendar, and most first-time viewers never count the days. They feel the pressure without naming where it comes from. The two detectives sit at the center of all this, and the film spends real time making them feel like opposites. Somerset is calm, careful, and worn smooth by years of seeing the worst in people. He reads, he thinks, he wants to understand the killer before chasing him. Mills, the younger one, is loud, eager, and sure of himself. He moved to this city on purpose, dragging his wife along, certain he can make a difference. On a first viewing, their clashing styles play as the usual mismatched partner setup, the kind of thing seen in 100 other movies. Underneath, the film is setting 2 very different men on 2 very different paths, and only one of them is going to be standing whole at the end. Then there is the ending, and the ending is the reason the whole film changes color once a person knows it is coming. After a long hunt, the killer is caught. Except he is not really caught. He turns himself in, bloody and calm, and offers to lead the detectives to his final 2 victims if they follow him out to a quiet stretch of land outside the city. Out there, in the open daylight, a delivery van arrives carrying a box. Inside that box is the head of Mills' wife, Tracy. The killer reveals that he envied Mills for having a normal, happy life, so he took it away. He wants Mills to shoot him in a rage and become the final sin, wrath. Mills, broken by grief, does exactly that. The killer wins. His design is finished, and he dies knowing it worked. The audience never sees inside the box. The horror lands entirely through the faces of the men standing around it, and through the slow, awful understanding of what has happened. Somerset tries to stop it. He knows what the killer is doing, knows that pulling the trigger gives the man precisely what he asked for. He cannot reach Mills in time. The final words of the film come from Somerset, who says that the world is a fine place and worth fighting for, and that he agrees with the second part. It is a small, sad scrap of hope, offered at the bottom of a very deep hole. On a first viewing, that ending hits like a hammer because it is shocking. On every viewing after, it hits in a worse way, because every earlier scene now points toward it. Tracy, alive and kind in the middle of the movie, is no longer just a worried wife. She is a person the audience now knows is already doomed. Her quiet moments, her gentle talks, her small hopes for a family, all of it becomes painful to sit through, because the outcome is locked. The film does not get sadder by adding anything. It gets sadder because the viewer can finally see the whole shape of the thing while the characters still cannot. What makes that ending even more remarkable is how close it came to never existing at all. The script was written by a struggling young writer named Andrew Kevin Walker, who worked at a record store in New York and poured his dark mood into a story about a killer obsessed with sin. His first version ended with the head in the box. Later, while trying to get the film made with a different director attached, Walker softened the ending into something less brutal. When David Fincher came along as the new director, the studio meant to send him the gentler, rewritten version. By accident, they sent him the original, savage one instead. Fincher read it, loved it, and told the studio plainly that the bleak version was the only one he would agree to shoot. They went along with it, though not happily, and one of the producers kept pushing against that ending through the entire shoot. The fight did not stop there. Brad Pitt cared so much about keeping the ending real and hard that he had it written into his contract, both the head in the box and his character being the one to kill the man. Even with all that locked down, after an early test screening, the studio came back with nervous suggestions. Maybe the killer should not die. Maybe the hero would seem braver if he held his fire. Maybe, instead of the wife, the box could hold the head of the family dog. Each of those changes would have softened the blow and saved the audience from the worst of it. Each one was turned away. The version that survived is the version that wounds. And it only survived because a few people refused to let it be made safe. All of this points to a single idea about how Se7en was built. The film does not put its darkness on the surface and dare the audience to look. It buries the darkness, plants it early, and lets it grow quietly until it blooms at the worst possible moment. The opening credits hold the killer. The endless rain holds the ending. The 7-day clock holds the body count. The kind, doomed wife holds the final blow. None of it screams for attention on a first pass. All of it waits. A movie made this way rewards a second viewing not with comfort, but with dread. Because the second time through is when a person finally sees how carefully the whole thing was arranged. That is what the title of this whole piece really means. The film gets darker every time it is watched because more of its design becomes visible with each pass, and almost everything that becomes visible is something terrible that was hiding the entire time. The story does not change. The understanding does. And understanding, in the world of Se7en, is rarely a kind thing to gain. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is one piece of this hidden design that goes further than all the rest, because it is not just a mood or a clue tucked into the background. At one of the crime scenes, in the middle of the investigation, the killer himself walks right up to one of the detectives, speaks to him, and even tells him a small, mocking truth to his face. Nobody in the scene realizes it. Most people watching for the first time do not realize it either. The man they are hunting is standing in the frame, in costume, hidden by nothing more than a job and a camera. And the next part of this story is about that moment and how much it changes once a person knows where to look. Section 2. The killer in the crowd. The crime scene is chaos. A man has been found strapped to a bed in a filthy room, kept alive and starved down to almost nothing, and the discovery brings a flood of police, reporters, and gawkers pressing in from every side. Cameras flash, voices shout over one another. In the middle of all that noise, a photographer shoves his way toward Mills and starts snapping pictures of him. Mills, already wound tight and sick of the circus, grabs the man and pushes him back, telling him to get lost. The photographer does not seem rattled. As he is shoved away, he calls back that Mills will be seeing his own picture in the papers soon enough. The moment passes in seconds. The story moves on to the next horror, and the audience moves with it. On a first viewing, that little scuffle reads as nothing. Reporters are pushy. Cops are stressed. A photographer threatening to print an unflattering shot of an angry detective feels like ordinary big city friction, the kind of background detail that fills out a busy scene and is forgotten by the next one. The brain files it under noise. There is a dead man in the room and a killer on the loose, so a rude man with a camera does not earn a second thought. The man with the camera is the killer. That fact does not arrive softly later in the film. It arrives buried inside a much larger shock, which is part of why so many people miss it the first time. When the detectives finally track down the apartment where the killer has been living, they step into a space stuffed with his madness. Journals are stacked to the ceiling, hundreds of them, the same notebooks glimpsed in the opening credits. Photographs cover the walls and fill the rooms. Among all those pictures, the detectives find a photo of Mills. The killer, it turns out, took pictures of his victims, and only his victims. A photograph of Mills sitting in that collection means one thing. Mills was already chosen. The detective hunting the killer had been marked as part of the killer plan, and the proof was taken at a crime scene with Mills standing right there, never once looking at the man holding the camera as anything more than a pest. Sit with that on a second viewing, and the earlier scene transforms completely. The pushy photographer is not pushy by accident. He came to that crime scene on purpose, dressed for the part, to get close to the man he had picked for the final act of his design. The shove Mills gives him is the closest the detective ever comes to stopping the killer with his own hands, and he has no idea. The line about the picture ending up in the papers stops being a small threat and becomes a sick little promise. The killer is telling Mills to his face that he has him, that his image is already being collected, that he is already part of the story being written. Mills hears an annoyance. The killer hears himself getting away with it. There is more to that exchange than the shove. While he is close, the man with the camera makes sure he has a clear shot of Mills, and he lets Mills know he got a good one, even taking the trouble to confirm the detective's last name so there is no mistake about whose picture he is taking. To Mills, it sounds like a reporter being a jerk and trying to get under his skin. To the killer, it is a man calmly logging his target while standing close enough to touch him. The whole thing is hidden behind the most ordinary disguise imaginable. No mask, no shadows, no clever trick. A jacket, a camera, and the simple fact that nobody at a crime scene looks twice at one more photographer in the crowd. This is where Se7en does something most thrillers never attempt. The killer is not a figure who lurks just out of sight until the big reveal. He moves through the daylight of the film, in the same rooms as the people chasing him, and the film lets the audience look right at him without understanding what they are seeing. The hunters believe they are the ones doing the watching. The truth, clear only in hindsight, is that the watching goes the other way. The man they are trying to find has already studied them up close, picked his ending, and walked away clean. The film drives the point home with a phone call. When the detectives are inside the killer apartment, sorting through the mountain of journals and photos, the phone rings. It is the killer. He is calm. He tells them he admires how good they are at their jobs, how quickly they have moved, how close they have gotten. Then he says something that should freeze the blood of anyone who knows how the film ends. He admits he feels bad about the fact that he is going to have to hurt one of them. He stops himself before saying more, because he does not want to spoil the surprise. A first-time viewer hears that and assumes the worst case is a wounded detective, maybe a trap waiting in a hallway, maybe the broken arm Mills is nursing by that point in the story. The threat sounds physical and immediate. A second-time viewer hears the same words and understands the real meaning. The killer is not talking about a punch or a bullet in a stairwell. He is talking about the thing he is going to take from Mills at the very end, the loss that will break the man completely. He is being polite about it. He is almost apologizing for it. And he is enjoying the fact that he gets to say it out loud while the men it will destroy stand there with no idea what he means. None of this works on the surface. On the surface, it is a tense scene in a serial killer apartment, full of creepy details and a chilling voice on the phone. The deeper layer only opens once the ending is known, and once it opens, it cannot be closed again. Every later watch carries that knowledge into these scenes from the start. The photographer at the crime scene is no longer a stranger. The picture of Mills is no longer a mystery to be solved. The voice on the phone is no longer making an empty threat. The viewer now sits a step ahead of the detectives, watching two men do careful, intelligent work, while a smarter, patient enemy stays 3 moves in front of them the whole time. That is the engine that makes Se7en heavier with each viewing. The film hides the killer in plain sight, then trusts the audience to find him on their own, later, when it hurts the most. A second watch becomes a strange kind of experience, where the suspense is no longer about who did it, because that is known, but about watching good men walk straight into something they cannot see. The dread does not come from surprise anymore. It comes from certainty. The outcome is fixed. The killer is already winning in every frame, and there is nothing to do but watch it happen again. The choice to build the film this way fits the kind of killer at its center. He is not driven by hunger or rage in the moment. He is a planner, a man who spent more than a year arranging his murders, down to the smallest detail, and a man who treats the whole bloody affair as a message he is leaving for the world. A killer like that does not hide because he is afraid of being seen. He hides because being unseen is part of the design. He wants to move among the people chasing him, to be close enough to touch, to stand at the crime scene he created and watch the detectives react to his work. The disguise at the crime scene is not just a way to avoid capture. It is part of the thrill and part of the control. He gets to be present for the early chapters of his own story, invisible, while the people he has chosen play the parts he wrote for them. For the viewer, that control is the most unsettling thing of all. A second viewing strips away the comfort of the chase. The first time, there is at least the feeling that the detectives are closing in, gathering clues, getting warmer. The second time, that feeling is gone, because the killer was never really being chased. He was leading. The clues that felt like detective work were breadcrumbs he chose to drop. The trail the detectives follow is the trail he laid for them. Even the moment that looks the most like a near miss, the shove at the crime scene, is really the killer getting exactly what he came for and strolling off with it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The film keeps faith with this idea right up to its final stretch, and it pays off the killer patience in a way that should feel impossible. After all the hunting, all the clues, all the long nights and dead ends, the detectives do not corner him. They do not kick down a door and drag him out in handcuffs at the end of a desperate chase. The moment of capture, when it finally comes, belongs entirely to the killer. He decides when it happens. He decides how it happens, and he walks into it, on his own 2 feet, with the calm of a man arriving exactly on schedule, carrying a plan that the detectives are still nowhere close to understanding. The way he chooses to end the chase is the next turn in this story, and it is one of the strangest and most disturbing choices the film makes. Section 3. The Man Who Turned Himself In. There was a moment, earlier in the hunt, when the detectives nearly had him. A trail of clues led them to a rundown apartment building, and they climbed the stairs not fully sure what they would find. The killer was already there. The instant he saw them, he opened fire, and a long, frantic chase tore through the halls and out into the pouring rain. The chase did not end in a capture. The killer got the upper hand, knocked Mills down hard, and ended up standing over him with a gun pointed at his head. He had every chance to pull the trigger. He chose not to. He left Mills alive on the wet ground and slipped away into the city. At the time, that mercy looks like luck, or maybe like a killer who simply ran out of time and had to flee. Seen again, with the ending known, it reads as something far worse. The killer let Mills live because he needed him alive. A dead Mills was no use to the plan. Mills had a part still to play. The hunt went on after that. More bodies turned up, each one tied to another of the 7 deadly sins, each one staged with the same sick care. A woman tied to a bed in a way meant to stand for lust. A model given a cruel choice that left her dead and stood for pride. The city grew more frightened with every killing, and the case dug its hooks deeper into the older detective, Se7en. He had been counting down the days to his retirement since the first scene, eager to be done, eager to leave the rot of the city behind. The killings changed his mind. He decided to stay on until the thing was finished, setting aside his plan to walk away. The man who wanted nothing more than to escape chose to stay in the dark a little longer, and that choice would cost him. Then comes one of the strangest scenes in the entire film. The detectives are still searching, still piecing together who this killer might be and where he might strike next, when the killer solves the problem for them. He walks into the police station on his own. He is covered in blood. He raises his hands and gives himself up, calm as anything, asking for his lawyer. There is no chase, no standoff, no clever trap that finally snaps shut. The most wanted man in the city strolls through the front door and surrenders. And he does it while a large stretch of the film still remains. That timing is the first thing that feels wrong. And it is meant to feel wrong. Almost every thriller ever made saves the capture of the villain for the very end. The whole shape of those stories points toward one moment, the moment the bad man is finally caught. And once he is caught, the story is basically over. Se7en breaks that shape, on purpose. It hands over the killer with a good chunk of the movie left to run, and the effect is deeply unsettling. The audience knows, somewhere in the back of the mind, that a story does not end the second the villain is in handcuffs if there is still that much film to go. Something else is coming. The surrender, instead of bringing relief, brings a low, creeping worry. The case feels solved and broken at the same time. The detectives feel it too. A killer this careful, this patient, this proud of his work, does not give himself up because he is tired or sorry. Se7en in particular understands that the surrender is not the end of anything. There are still 2 victims unaccounted for, 2 sins with no body attached. And a man who planned every step for more than a year does not stumble at the finish line and quit. The calm of the killer in custody is the calm of a man whose plan is going exactly the way he drew it up. He is not a prisoner. He is a host. And he is about to invite the detectives into the last rooms of the house he built. The terms make that plain. Through his lawyer, the killer lays out an offer. He will confess to everything, all of it, every murder, and clear the whole case on one condition. The detectives must drive him out to a remote spot, just the 2 of them and him, and he will lead them to the last 2 bodies. If they refuse, he will plead insanity, and the full truth of his crimes may never come out. It is offered as a choice, but it is not really a choice at all. The detectives want the case closed. They want the missing victims found. They want to understand what this man did and why. Saying no means letting him control the story from a jail cell for years. Saying yes means doing exactly what he asks. They say yes. The hunters agree to be driven, by their own decision, straight into whatever the killer has prepared. This is the moment the power in the film finishes shifting, though the shift began long before. From the surrender onward, the killer is openly running things. He decided when to be caught. He decided the terms of his confession. He decided where everyone is going and what they will find when they get there. The detectives, who spent the whole film believing they were closing in, are now simply following directions. They drive his route. They go to his location. They walk into his ending. Every step they take is a step he chose for them, and they take each one believing it is their own idea, or at least their only good option. The drive out is its own quiet horror once the ending is known. The killer sits calmly in the back of the car and talks. He is not raving. He is not begging. He speaks like a man who has thought long and hard about the world and decided he is right about it. He explains, in his flat and certain way, why he did what he did. He believes that people have grown numb, that they shrug off sin and cruelty and waste their lives without a second thought, and that nothing short of something monstrous will force them to pay attention. Tapping someone on the shoulder does no good anymore, he says. To make people truly look, a person has to hit them with the force of a sledgehammer. And then, finally, they will give their full attention. His murders, in his own mind, are that sledgehammer. He sees himself not as a madman, but as a teacher delivering a lesson the world is too dull to learn any other way. On a first viewing, this car ride plays as a chilling look inside a killer head, the kind of speech that explains the monster while the audience waits to see where the road leads. On a later viewing, the same scene curdles into something almost unbearable, because by then the destination is known. The calm voice in the back seat belongs to a man who has already finished the worst part of his plan. He is not building toward his cruelty. He has already done it. The lesson he keeps talking about is already complete, sitting in a box that has not arrived yet. And he knows it. His patience, his politeness, his steady little speeches are the patience of a man savoring the gap between the act and the moment the detectives will understand the act. He is enjoying the wait. The audience, watching a second time, is forced to wait with him, knowing what he knows. The blood is the clearest sign of this, and it is a sign most people do not catch the first time. When the killer walks into the station to surrender, he is soaked in blood that is never explained in the moment. There is no wound shown, no fight described, no clear reason for a man who came in quietly to be covered in it. A first-time viewer might assume it belongs to one of the victims already found, or simply file it under the general grime of the film and move on. The truth of where that blood came from only becomes clear at the very end. And once it does, the surrender scene can never look innocent again. The man who walked in so calmly had just done the thing that would shatter Mills completely. He carried the evidence of it on his own clothes into a room full of police, and not one of them knew what they were looking at. He sat in their custody, bloody and serene, holding the most terrible secret in the film behind a quiet face. That is the cruelty of how this section of the story is built. The surrender is dressed up as a victory, the long-awaited capture of a dangerous man. And on a first watch, it carries at least a thin thread of hope. The killer is in custody. The detectives are in control. The worst, surely, is behind them. Every bit of that hope is false. and a second viewing knows it from the instant he walks through the door. The capture is not the detectives catching the killer. It is the killer reaching the next stage of his own plan, on his own schedule, with the detectives playing the roles he assigned. What looks like the end of his freedom is really the beginning of his final move. This is why the surrender, more than almost any other scene, gets darker the more it is watched. The first time, the feeling is confusion melting into dread as the strangeness of the timing sinks in. After that, the confusion is gone, replaced by a heavy, sick knowledge that sits over the whole stretch of film. There is no mystery left in the car ride. There is only the slow approach of something the viewer cannot stop and the detectives cannot see. The killer talks. The car rolls on through the gray, and the audience, knowing the road leads somewhere awful, watches two decent men drive a calm monster toward the worst day of their lives, doing it willingly because he made them believe it was the right thing to do. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. By the time the car turns off toward open country and the rain finally thins, the killer has won nearly everything he set out to win. He has been seen and not caught when it mattered. He has been caught only when he wanted to be. He has the two detectives exactly where he needs them, driving exactly where he told them to drive. All that is left is for them to learn what he already knows. The full weight of his design rests on the murders themselves, on what he did to the people he chose, and why each death was shaped so carefully, and on the way those killings were meant to be read like pages in a single, terrible argument. What he actually did to those victims, and the cold logic behind the way he did it, is where the true depth of his sickness comes into view. Section 4. 7 Deaths, 1 Message. The murders are where the killer mind shows itself most clearly, and the detectives almost never see them happen. They arrive after. They walk into rooms where the worst has already been done and try to read what the killer left behind. Each scene is arranged with terrible care, set up to be found, set up to be understood. The deaths are not quick or hidden or made to look like accidents. They are displays. Every one of them is built to say something, and the man who built them wanted the police, and through them the whole world, to read the message. The first body belongs to a hugely overweight man found slumped face down in a bowl of food in a filthy kitchen. At first glance, it looks like a sad, gross death, a man who ate himself into the grave alone in a dirty apartment. The truth is far darker. The man was tied up and force-fed until his stomach gave out and killed him. He was made to eat far past the point any person could survive, hour after hour, until his own body broke. On the wall, the killer left a single word to name the sin he was punishing. This was gluttony, the sin of taking far more than a person needs, and the killer had turned the sin into the method of death. The man who ate too much was made to eat until eating destroyed him. Somerset is the one who senses there is more here than a random horror. Standing in that kitchen, he notices how much thought went into the scene, how precise the cruelty is, and he says that the level of care means the death itself is meant to carry a message. Most cops would see a sick crime and move on. Somerset sees a man making a point. That small insight is the first crack of light on what the killer is really doing. And on a first viewing, it is easy to let it slide past as the older detective just being thorough. On a later viewing, his words land like a warning bell, because he is right. And being right about this killer is a curse, not a gift. The second body deepens the pattern. A wealthy lawyer is found dead in his fancy office, and the scene is staged around the sin of greed. The lawyer had spent his career defending terrible people for money, freeing the guilty and growing rich off it, at least in the killer's eyes. So the killer made him pay in the most literal way possible. The lawyer was forced, at the threat of death, to cut a piece of flesh from his own body, a pound of his own weight, the price of his greed taken straight out of him. He bled to death doing it. The word naming the sin was left at the scene like a label on a piece of art. The death matches the crime the killer believes the man committed, turned into something physical and exact. That second scene also hides a clue that ties the murders together in a way the detectives do not expect. A painting in the office is hanging upside down, an odd little detail that draws the eye. Behind it, the killer left fingerprints, pressed there on purpose. Those prints send the detectives racing to a new address, sure they are about to catch their man. What they find instead is the third victim, and a fresh kind of horror. The third body is the one that breaks something in the people who find it, and in many people who watch the film. In a dim, foul room, a man lies strapped to a bed, so starved and wasted that he looks like a corpse, like he has been dead for a long time. The detectives photograph him as a body. Then the body breathes. Then it makes a sound. The man is still alive. He has been kept alive, tied down and unable to move for exactly 1 year, to the very day. The killer fed him just enough to keep his heart going while his body rotted around him. This is the sin of sloth, the sin of doing nothing, of letting life waste away. And the killer punished it by forcing a year of total stillness on a man, until that stillness was all that was left of him. The victim had been a drug dealer and a child abuser before he was taken, the kind of person the killer judged worthy of the lesson. The shock of the discovery is so great that the man dies soon after from the strain of it. The fingerprints that led the detectives to that room came from this third victim. The killer had cut a finger from the starving man and used it to leave prints back at the lawyer office, planting the clue that pulled the police to the next stage of his display. The deaths are not separate crimes scattered across a city. They are linked, one feeding into the next, parts of a single long piece of work that the killer had been building for over a year. The detectives realize this, and the weight of it settles in. A man who can keep a victim alive for a year while planning the rest is not a man having sudden violent fits. He is following a plan written long before the first body was found. The killings continue along the same cold logic. A woman is killed in a setup meant to stand for lust, and the killer does not even do it with his own hands. He forces another person to take part, threatening him into being the instrument of the death, so that the act of lust becomes the act of killing. The cruelty doubles. The victim dies, and an innocent man is wrecked forever by being made to do it. The killer stays clean, directing the horror from a safe distance, the way he directs everything. The death tied to the sin of pride is its own special cruelty, because the killer turns the victim's own nature into the weapon. A beautiful model is attacked, and her face, the thing her pride was built on, is ruined. Then the killer gives her a choice. He leaves her with a way to call for help and live, scarred and changed forever, or a way to end her life cleanly and avoid living disfigured. He glues a phone to one of her hands and pills to the other, and lets her decide. She chooses death over living without her beauty. Her pride, the killer is saying, was so deep that she would rather die than be seen as less than perfect. And he built the trap so that her pride would do the final work for him. Look across all of it, and a single sickening shape appears. Each victim was chosen because the killer judged them guilty of one of the 7 deadly sins. the old list of human failings that has been written about for hundreds of years. The glutton was made to eat. The greedy man was made to pay in flesh. The slothful man was made to lie still until stillness killed him. Each punishment is matched to the sin with a kind of awful neatness, like a teacher grading a paper. The killer does not see himself as a monster. He sees himself as a judge handing down sentences the world is too soft to hand down on its own. In his mind, he is doing holy work, cleaning up a filthy world one sinner at a time. And the careful staging of each death is his way of making sure no one can miss the point. That belief is what makes him so frightening. And it is something that only sinks in fully on a second or third viewing. The first time through, the murders hit as a string of gruesome shocks, each scene more disturbing than the last. The kind of thing that makes a person look away. The brain treats them as horror. On a later viewing, with the killer plan and beliefs fully known, the same scenes stop being random horror and become something colder and more organized. They are arguments. They are sermons made out of human bodies. The killer is not lashing out. He is teaching, in the only language he thinks will make people listen. And every body is a sentence in a speech he has been writing for over a year. Understanding that does not make the murders easier to watch. It makes them harder, because the madness has a method. And the method has a mind behind it that never loses its calm. There is a choice in how the film shows all this that is easy to overlook and important to notice. The murders themselves are almost never shown on screen. The audience does not watch the glutton being force-fed. The audience does not watch the lawyer cut into himself, or the year of the starving man, or the model making her terrible choice. The film shows the rooms afterward, the staged results, and lets the detectives and the audience piece together what must have happened. The worst of it lives in the imagination, built from the clues left behind. A person watching fills in the horror with their own mind, and the mind is far better at horror than any camera could be. That choice is a big reason the film grows heavier with each viewing. A movie that shows everything tends to lose its grip over time. Because once a shocking image has been seen, it cannot shock the same way twice. Se7en keeps most of its worst moments off the screen and inside the head, where they never quite settle and never lose their edge. On a second viewing, knowing what each scene led to, the imagination has even more to work with. The starving man room is worse the second time, because the viewer now knows the full meaning of the year he spent there. The lawyer office is worse, because the trick with the painting and the finger is now understood. The film hands over more pieces each time, and the picture they build is always uglier than before. The patience behind the murders is its own quiet terror. A year of planning, at the very least, sits underneath everything the detectives find. The killer did not improvise. He chose his victims, studied them, judged them, and arranged their deaths with the long, slow care of a man who was in no hurry and feared no interruption. The detectives, racing from scene to scene, are always behind, always reacting, always reading a story whose ending was written before they ever opened the first file. On a first viewing, the chase feels alive, like the cops might catch up. On a later viewing, the gap between the planner and the chasers is plain in every scene. The killer had a year. The detectives had a week. The math of that was never going to land in the detectives' favor. All of this builds toward a truth the film keeps circling. The killer is not a wild animal who can be cornered and stopped. He is a careful, patient, deeply sick man who believes with his whole heart that he is right. And that belief makes him impossible to reason with and impossible to predict. The detectives keep trying to think like cops chasing a criminal. The killer is not thinking like a criminal at all. He is thinking like a man on a mission from something larger than himself. A man who has already accepted that he will die for his work, and only cares that the work gets finished and remembered. A person like that cannot be scared off or bargained with. He can only be allowed to reach the end of his plan, which is exactly what ends up happening. The murders, taken together, are the clearest window into that mind, and they reward a careful eye in the worst way. Each viewing reveals a little more of the design, a little more of the logic, a little more of the cold certainty driving it all. The shock of the first watch fades. What replaces it is something steadier and more disturbing. The slow understanding of a man who turned killing into a sermon and a city into his classroom. The horror stops being about what was done and starts being about who could do it, and why he felt so sure he was justified. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That question of who he is sits at the dead center of the film, and the film answers it in the strangest possible way. The man behind all this careful planning, all these matched and meaningful deaths, has no name. He has no past anyone can find, no record, no history, nothing to hold on to. He even erased the prints from his own fingers so that no one could ever truly say who he was. The man who knew everything about his victims made sure the world would know nothing about him. And the empty space where his identity should be turns out to be one of the most chilling things about him. Section 5. The Man with No Name. The man behind every careful death, every staged room, every matched and meaningful murder is called John Doe. That is not a name. It is the label police put on a body when they have no idea who the dead person is. A stand-in word for nobody, for anybody, for a person without a history. The killer chose it for himself. Or rather, he left such a clean blank where his real name should be that John Doe is the only thing left to call him. The most important person in the film, the one who drives the whole story, is a void. He has no past anyone can dig up, no record, no family that ever appears, no real name spoken aloud. He is a hole in the middle of the movie, shaped like a man. That emptiness was built on purpose, by the killer himself. He removed his own fingerprints, working the skin off the tips of his fingers so that he would leave no mark the police could trace. A person doing that is not just hiding from one crime. He is erasing the very idea of himself, making sure that no machine, no file, no database could ever point to him and say, "This is who he is." The opening of the film, those slow, careful hands, shows part of this work without explaining it. The man is unmaking his own identity, piece by piece, long before the first body is found. Because of that erasing, the detectives cannot find him the normal way. There are no prints to match, no name to chase, no paper trail leading to a door. The only reason they ever locate him at all is a clever trick built on the one thing he could not hide. He reads. A man this obsessed with the 7 deadly sins, with the old writings about them, has to study. And studying means borrowing books. Somerset uses a contact to pull a secret list of people who had checked out the kinds of dark, specific books that match the killer thinking. One name on that list leads to an address. The man who scrubbed away his fingerprints and his identity is finally found through his library card, through the trail left by his own hunger to understand sin. He hid everything about himself except the shape of his obsession, and the obsession is what gave him away. What waits in his apartment makes the emptiness even louder. The rooms are stuffed with his writing. Notebook after notebook, hundreds of them, filled edge to edge with tight, frantic handwriting. The same journals glimpsed in the opening. A normal home holds the marks of a life, photos of family, letters, small clues to who a person is and where they came from. His home holds none of that. It holds only the work. Pages and pages of thought, judgment and planning, and almost nothing that says who this man was before he became this. He has written more words than most people write in a lifetime, and not one of them tells the detectives who he is. He poured himself entirely into the killings and kept nothing back for a self. The film makes a bold choice here, and it is a choice that many other movies are too nervous to make. It never explains him. There is no scene where a doctor lays out the childhood that broke him. There is no tragic past that pops up to make his evil make sense. There is no twist where he turns out to have suffered some specific wound that turned him into this. He simply is what he is, a man certain of his mission, with no origin story offered to soften or explain it. The audience is given his beliefs and his actions, and nothing underneath them. The why of him stops at his ideas. There is no deeper reason waiting to be found. That refusal to explain him is one of the most unsettling things in the entire film, and it grows more unsettling on each viewing. A first watch is so busy reacting to the shock of him that the missing backstory barely registers. There is too much else happening. On a second or third watch, with the shocks already known, the empty space where his history should be starts to feel enormous. The mind wants a reason. The mind wants to know what made him, because knowing what made him would make him a little less frightening, would put him in a box marked damaged or sick, or shaped by some terrible event. The film never lets that box exist. He stays unexplained, and an unexplained evil is far harder to live with than one with a clear cause. A monster with a sad past can be pitied in a way, and pity is a kind of safety. This man offers nothing to pity. He offers only certainty. He says as much himself in his calm way during the long drive at the end. When the talk turns to him, he waves his own importance away. He tells the detectives that he is nothing special, that he never has been, that the point was never him. Only the work matters in his mind. He sees himself as a tool, a hand carrying out something larger than any single person. And he genuinely does not seem to care whether the world remembers his face or his name. He cares only that the world remembers the lesson. A killer hungry for personal fame would want his name in every headline. This man wants the opposite. He wants to disappear into the work so completely that the work is all that is left. The emptiness where his identity should be is not an accident of the plot. It is something he chose, and even seems proud of. The film carried this idea all the way into how it was made, in a move that fits the character so well, it feels like part of the story. The actor who plays John Doe was, at the time, a rising star whose name could sell tickets. The studio wanted to put that name on the posters and in the opening credits, the way studios always do with a known face. The filmmakers refused. They kept the actor name out of the opening credits entirely and off the marketing, so that audiences walking into the theater would have no idea who would turn out to be the killer. The reveal would land clean, with no famous name spoiling it ahead of time. The man stayed a stranger to the audience, the same way he stayed a stranger to the detectives. The film practiced the very thing its killer preached. It hid him. On a first viewing, That trick works exactly as intended. The killer arrives without warning, a face the audience has not been told to expect, slipping into the story late and taking it over. On a later viewing, knowing who the actor is and knowing the whole plan, the hiding becomes its own layer of dread. The calm, ordinary man at the center of all that horror is no longer a surprise. He is a known quantity, and somehow that makes him worse. There is no mystery left to soften him. There is only a plain man with a plain voice who did unspeakable things for reasons he fully believes in, and who never once raises that voice or loses that calm. The plainness is the key to the whole fear of him. He is not a snarling beast or a wild-eyed lunatic. He moves and speaks like an ordinary person, quiet and controlled. The kind of man who could stand next to anyone at a crime scene with a camera and never draw a second look. The name John Doe drives this home. He is every man and no man at once. A faceless figure who could be anybody, who could be the neighbor, the stranger on the train, the quiet man down the hall. The film already showed, back at the crime scene with the camera, how easily he walks among normal people without being seen. His lack of a name and a face is the same idea taken to its end. He is hidden not by shadows, but by how unremarkable he appears. And a threat that looks like everyone is a threat that can never be fully relaxed around. This is part of why the film refuses to give him a backstory or a clear cause. A killer with a specific, strange history is a killer the audience can hold at a distance. A special case, a one-in-a-million horror that surely could not be anyone they know. By keeping him blank, the film denies that comfort. He could be made of nothing more than ideas that anyone might pick up, beliefs taken to a monstrous end. There is no rare wound that explains him, which means there is no reassurance that the people watching are safe from ever meeting someone like him. The emptiness is a mirror. It reflects back the unsettling thought that evil might not always come with a reason attached. A second viewing sees all of this at once, and it changes how the killer feels from his very first appearance. The first time, he is a shock and a mystery, a late arrival who flips the story. Every time after, he is a known and total blank, a man whose calm and certainty have nowhere to hide. Watching him surrender, watching him talk in the car, watching him guide the detectives with that steady voice, the viewer now understands that there is no hidden person to reach, no soft center, no buried reason that might be argued with. There is only the work and the belief, sitting in a body with no name. The detectives spend the film trying to learn who he is. The terrible answer is that there is no who. There is only what he does and why he thinks he is right to do it. That blankness also makes his choices feel even more deliberate, more frightening, because nothing about him is accidental. A man acting out of trauma might be excused as not fully in control. This man is in complete control at every moment. He erased himself on purpose. He chose his victims on purpose. He surrendered on purpose. He left a library trail because he could not avoid reading, and that single crack in his blankness is the only human thing the detectives can grab. Everything else about him is sealed and intentional. He is a designed thing, designed by his own hand, scrubbed clean of the past and pointed entirely at his mission. The deepest chill of the man with no name is what it says about his hunger. He gave up everything that makes a normal life. He has no home in any warm sense, no family, no friends, no name to be called by people who love him, no history to look back on. He traded all of that away to become a vessel for his idea. And a man who has given up every ordinary human comfort, who owns nothing of a real life, ends up obsessed with the very thing he threw away. The emptiness at his center is not just a hole. It is a hunger. And that hunger turns, near the end, toward a single person who has everything the killer chose to live without. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That person is one of the detectives, the young one, Mills, who has the things the killer will never have. A name people say with love. A home that is more than a room full of notebooks. A future. A wife. The faceless, nameless man who erased his own life becomes fixed on the ordinary, happy life of the man hunting him. And the warmth of that life, the one bright and gentle thing in the whole gray film, becomes the exact thing the killer sets out to destroy. The woman at the heart of that warmth, and the quiet bond she forms with the older detective, is where the film hides its only real tenderness. And it is tenderness the film is preparing to take away. Section 6. The one good thing. In a film soaked in rain and rot, where nearly every room is dim and every person seems tired or cruel or already half dead inside, there is one source of light, and her name is Tracy. She is the young detective wife, and she came to this grim city because her husband wanted to, leaving behind whatever life they had before. She does not belong to the darkness of the place. She is kind, open, and warm in a way that stands out sharply against everything around her. The city has nothing for her. It is loud and dirty and frightening, and she spends much of the film alone in a small apartment while her husband chases a monster through the streets. The film sets her apart on purpose. She is the one good and gentle thing in a world the killer believes is rotten to the core. Tracy is unhappy in the city, and she does not hide it well, though she tries. She misses the quiet of where they used to live. She worries about her husband and the dark work that consumes him. Cut off from the friends and the home she knew, she has almost no one to talk to. Out of that loneliness, she reaches out to the one person in her husband world who seems steady and safe, the older detective, Somerset. She invites him to dinner at their apartment, and a small, warm evening unfolds in the middle of all the horror. The three of them sit together over a meal, talking, laughing a little, and for a few minutes the film lets the rain stay outside and the grimness fall away. It is one of the only times the movie breathes. That dinner does something quiet and important. It builds a real bond between Tracy and Somerset, two people who might never have crossed paths if the case had not thrown them together. Somerset is a man who long ago gave up on warmth, who keeps everyone at a distance, who plans to leave the city and live alone. Tracy gets past that distance almost without trying, simply by being decent to him. She treats him like a person and not a co-worker, and he responds to it. By the end of the dinner, a gentle trust has formed, the kind that makes what comes later so much harder to bear. There is a layer underneath these scenes that comes from real life, and it adds something the camera could never have planned for. The actors playing Mills and Tracy began a real relationship around the making of this film. The ease between them on screen, the small, comfortable looks, the way they move around each other in their cramped apartment, carries a warmth that feels lived in because some of it was real. A film built almost entirely out of cold rooms and colder people has, at its center, a young couple with genuine softness between them. And that softness reads as true because part of it was. The one tender thing in the movie was tender in the world outside it, too. The bond between Tracy and Somerset deepens in a scene that changes the whole emotional shape of the film. Tracy calls Somerset and asks to meet, alone, away from her husband. They sit together in a quiet place, and she tells him a secret she has been carrying by herself. She is pregnant. She has not told her husband yet, and she is not sure she wants to keep the child, because she hates the city so much, because the world she sees around her every day seems like such a terrible place to raise a baby. She is frightened and unsure, and she has no one else she can say any of this to. She chose Somerset because he is wise and kind and outside the storm of her marriage, and because she trusts him to be honest with her. What Somerset gives her in return is one of the most human moments in the film. He does not lecture her or judge her. He tells her something painful from his own past, a thing he has carried for a long time. Years before, he was with a woman, and she became pregnant, and he talked her out of keeping the child. At the time, given the world and given who he was, it felt like the right and responsible choice. He has thought about it ever since. He tells Tracy that he is certain about almost nothing, but he knows this. If she decides she does not want the child, then she should tell no one, not even her husband, and never speak of it again, so that she carries it the way he carries his. But if she decides to have the baby, then she should treasure that child with everything she has, spoiling it every chance she gets. It is the gentlest, saddest advice given by a man who knows the weight of the choice from the inside, and it lands on Tracy like a kind of mercy. On a first viewing, this whole stretch of the film plays as a tender, sorrowful break from the murders, a quiet, human island in a brutal story. It deepens the characters. It makes Tracy real and makes Somerset more than a tired old cop. It gives the audience people to care about, which is exactly what good stories do before they raise the stakes. A first-time viewer leaves these scenes feeling closer to everyone in them, more invested, more hopeful that things might somehow turn out all right for this young couple and the child that might be coming. Every bit of that warmth turns to grief on a second viewing, because by then, the ending is known. Tracy does not survive the film. The killer murders her, and he does it precisely because she is the warm, good thing at the center of Mill's happy life, the life the killer envies and cannot have. He takes her in the cruelest way and uses her death as the final blow in his plan. And the child she was carrying, the child she sat in that quiet place and worried over, dies with her, never born, never known by the father who did not even learn it existed until the very end. Knowing all of that, a person cannot watch the dinner or the secret conversation the same way ever again. The dinner scene, so light and warm the first time, becomes almost unbearable the second. The laughter is the laughter of a woman who has only days to live. The small comforts of that apartment are about to be erased. Every kind word Tracy says, every gentle thing she does, now carries the shadow of what is coming. And the viewer sits there, holding knowledge that none of the people on screen possess. The same is true of the secret conversation. Tracy, worrying about whether the world is a fit place to raise a child, becomes heartbreaking, because the world is about to prove itself far worse than she feared. And the choice she is agonizing over is about to be taken out of her hands entirely. Somerset advice, so gentle and wise, is advice about a future that will never arrive. There is a deeper cruelty in how this plays on a rewatch, and it has to do with the secret itself. The pregnancy is something Tracy shares only with Somerset. Her husband does not know. The audience, the first time, learns it alongside Somerset and holds it as a tender secret between two characters. The killer, it turns out, knew too. He had studied Mill's life, had watched the family, had chosen them long before. By the end, when the killer reveals what he has done, he speaks of the child, throwing the knowledge in Mill's face as the final wound. On a second viewing, the audience now shares that terrible knowledge from the start, which means the audience is, in a sick way, lined up with the killer. The viewer watches the warm scenes, already knowing the secret and already knowing the loss, holding the same dark foreknowledge the killer held while he moved through the story. The tenderness of those scenes is poisoned by the fact that the people watching now know what the monster knew. This is the cruelest trick the film plays, and it is the clearest example of why Se7en grows heavier every single time it is watched. Most of the film darkens on a rewatch because clues and meanings come into focus, because the killer plan becomes visible, because the design reveals itself. The scenes with Tracy darken for a different and more painful reason. They darken because they are happy. And happiness inside a story whose ending is known becomes a kind of slow ache. There is nothing to figure out in the dinner scene. There is no hidden clue in the secret conversation. There is only warmth, and the knowledge that the warmth is doomed, and the helpless feeling of watching good people enjoy a life that is about to be torn apart. The film built Tracy this way on purpose. A story that wants a loss to hurt has to first make the audience love the thing that will be lost. Se7en spends its small supply of light almost entirely on her, making her the one person in the whole movie who feels fully alive and fully kind. The one bright window in a building full of dark rooms. The reason is plain in hindsight. The brighter that window, the deeper the dark when it goes out. The film is patient about it, the same way the killer is patient, taking its time to make the audience care, knowing exactly what it intends to do with that care later. The warmth is not a gift to the viewer. It is a setup. That patience is part of what makes the film feel so honest, even at its most painful. It does not rush the warmth or treat Tracy as a throwaway. It gives her real scenes, real feelings, a real bond with Somerset, a real secret that matters. It makes her a whole person before it takes her away, which is precisely why losing her hits as hard as it does. A film that wanted only to shock could have killed any stranger. This film wanted to wound, and to wound deeply. So it made sure there was someone worth grieving. On a first watch, the wound comes as a sudden shock. On every watch after, it begins the moment Tracy first appears, because the grief now has nowhere to hide. By the time the story leaves the warm apartment behind and follows the men out toward the empty land where the killer wants them, the audience watching a second time is already mourning. Tracy is still alive on screen in the earlier scenes, still kind, still hopeful, still worried about her unborn child. And the viewer already knows she is gone. That gap between the living warmth on screen and the death the viewer carries in their mind is the heaviest weight the film places on anyone willing to watch it more than once. The good thing is still glowing, and the dark is already certain. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. All of that grief and foreknowledge funnels toward a single spot. A bare stretch of ground far from the city, under an open sky, where a delivery van comes rolling up out of nowhere, carrying a plain cardboard box. Everything the film has built, the killer patience, the hidden presence, the careful murders, the empty man with no name, the warm young wife, and the secret she carried. All of it arrives at that box, and the moment one detective is forced to understand what it holds. What happens in that final stretch is the heart of the whole film. The place where the killer wins and a good man is broken. And it deserves to be looked at closely and slowly. Section 7. The box in the field. The car finally leaves the city behind. For the whole film, the world has been wet, gray, and closed in. Street after street of rain and concrete and crowding buildings. Now the buildings fall away, and the land opens up into a wide, empty flatness under a pale sky. crossed by tall power lines that stretch off in long rows toward nothing. The rain is gone. The sun is out. For the first time in the entire movie, there is open daylight and open space. In almost any other story, that shift would feel like relief, like the characters have escaped the darkness at last and stepped into the light. Here, it feels like the opposite. The light does not bring safety. It brings the worst moment of all. Out in the open, where there is nowhere to hide from it, the killer sits in the back of the car, calm as ever, directing the detectives to the spot he has chosen. There are no more bodies waiting in some hidden room. There is only this empty field and a plan that is almost finished. The detectives still believe they are here to find the last two victims, the final two sins, so they can close the case and be done with this man forever. They do not understand that they are standing inside the ending he wrote, that the field was always the last page, and that the two of them are not here as investigators. They are here as the final pieces of his design. A small dot appears in the distance, moving toward them across the flat land. It grows into a delivery van. Somerset, the older detective, walks out to meet it, his instincts screaming that something is wrong. The driver is an ordinary man with no idea what he is part of. He explains that he was paid a sum of money to bring a package to this exact place at this exact time, and that is all he knows. He is just a courier following instructions, a stranger pulled into the killer plan to deliver the final blow without ever understanding it. The van holds a single box, plain and unremarkable, the kind of box that could hold anything. Somerset takes the box and carries it a short distance away, apart from the others, apart from Mills. Something in the killer calm, in the careful timing of the delivery, has told him that whatever is inside is meant to do harm, and he wants to see it before anyone else does. He opens it alone. The film does not show what he sees. There is no shot of the contents, no lingering image of the horror inside. The camera stays on his face, and his face tells the whole story. Whatever is in that box drains everything out of him. He staggers. He looks like a man who has just understood something he will never be able to understand. And in that instant, he knows exactly what the killer has done, and exactly what is about to happen. That choice, to keep the box closed to the audience, is one of the smartest decisions the film ever makes, and it is a big reason the ending never loses its power. A camera showing the contents would give the audience a single fixed image, something that could be braced against on a second viewing, something that loses a little of its sting each time it is seen. By keeping the box closed and showing only the reactions of the men around it, the film puts the horror in the imagination, where it stays raw. The actor playing Somerset does the work that no gory image could do. His shock, his grief, his dawning understanding, all of it lands harder than any picture of the contents could. And it lands just as hard the 10th time as the first. Somerset understands, and he runs. He runs back toward Mills and the killer, desperate to get there in time, desperate to stop what he now knows is coming. He tries to warn his partner, tries to keep him back, tries to take control of a situation that is already slipping away. By the time he reaches them, the killer has already begun to speak, and his words are doing the work the box was meant to do. He is no longer the silent, careful planner. He is talking now, calmly twisting the knife, telling Mills things designed to break him. The killer reveals the heart of his plan in that quiet, steady voice. He confesses that he envied Mills. He envied the young detective's ordinary, happy life, the home, the marriage, the simple human warmth that the killer himself gave up long ago and could never have. That envy, he explains, is his own sin. The sin he has saved for himself in his list of 7. He went to Mill's home. He spent time there. And he killed Mill's wife, Tracy. He took her life because she was the center of the life he envied, and he carried away a piece of her as proof, sealed in the box now sitting in the field. Then he says the thing that turns grief into something bottomless. Tracy was pregnant. The killer knew it. He says it out loud, throwing it at Mills like a final stone. And Mills, who never knew his wife was carrying a child, learns that he has lost not only her, but a future he did not even know he had. Everything the film built quietly across its whole length arrives in this moment with crushing force. The warm dinner, the secret conversation, the gentle worry over whether to bring a child into the world. All of it was leading here, to a field where a husband learns of his wife and his unborn child in the same breath, from the mouth of the man who killed them. On a first viewing, the reveal hits as a sudden, staggering shock, almost too much to take in. On a second viewing, it is a slow execution, because the audience has known since the warm scenes what was hidden inside that box and inside that confession, and has had to carry that knowledge through every gentle moment, waiting for it to detonate. Then the trap snaps fully shut. The killer has placed himself as the victim of one sin, envy, the man who wanted what another had. For his design to be complete, one sin remains, wrath. And he has arranged it so that Mills, standing there destroyed, gun in hand, is the only one who can supply it. If Mills kills him in his rage and grief, the killer becomes the second-to-last victim, and Mills becomes the last, the living embodiment of wrath, the final sermon written not in someone else's body, but in the soul of a good man turned into a killer. The whole long plan, the murders, the surrender, the drive, the box, all of it was built to bring Mills to this exact edge and push him over it. Somerset sees it clearly and tries with everything he has to stop it. He pleads with Mills. He tells him that if he pulls the trigger, the killer wins. That killing this man is exactly what the man wants. That giving in to the rage completes the very plan they have spent the whole film trying to stop. He begs his partner not to hand the killer his victory. Mills hears him. Some part of Mills surely knows he is right. But the grief is too large, the loss too fresh, the cruelty too total. A man who has just learned that his wife and child were murdered by the calm figure kneeling in front of him cannot hold that much pain and stay still. Mills raises the gun and fires, again and again, emptying it into the killer. And in doing so, he becomes the final piece of the design. The killer dies smiling on the inside, knowing his work is finished and his point is made. That is how the film ends its central story. The villain is not stopped. The villain wins, completely and on purpose, by proving his ugly idea about the world true in the worst possible way. He believed people were rotten under the surface, capable of monstrous things if pushed hard enough. And he set out to prove it on the most decent young man he could find. He took an idealist, a man who came to the city believing he could do good, and he turned him into a murderer in a field, broken beyond repair. The killer did not just commit crimes. He won an argument, and the price of the argument was a man's soul. The aftermath is quiet and devastating. Mills, hollowed out, is led away by other officers, no longer a detective, no longer the eager young man from the start of the film, just a wreck of a person who has lost everything and done a terrible thing. Somerset stays behind, the older man who spent the whole film trying to leave this world, and now cannot bring himself to abandon it. When he is asked where he will be, he says he will be around, giving up the retirement he had counted down to from the first scene. The man who wanted out has chosen to stay in, because watching what happened to his partner has shown him that walking away is not an answer. The film closes on his voice, offering a thought about the world being a place worth fighting for, and admitting that he believes only the second part of it, that the fighting matters even when the world itself seems beyond saving. That final note is the only thread of light the film allows itself, and it is a thin one. There is no justice in the ending. The killer got everything he wanted. Tracy and her child are gone. Mills is destroyed. The only thing salvaged from the wreckage is an old man's decision to keep trying, to stay in the fight. And even that is offered without certainty. It is hope, but hope worn down to almost nothing. The smallest possible reason to go on after the darkest possible ending. On a first viewing, the field sequence is a free-fall. The box, the confession, the pregnancy, the gunshots, all of it comes fast and lands like a series of blows, leaving the viewer stunned. There is no time to brace. On every viewing after, the same sequence becomes a slow, dreadful descent, because the outcome is fully known from the moment the car leaves the city. The open daylight no longer reads as a possible escape. The van in the distance is no longer a mystery. The box is no longer a question. Somerset run back across the field is no longer a chance to save the day, because the audience knows he will not make it in time. The whole climax shifts from shock to grief, and grief that is seen coming from far away is, in its own way, harder to sit through than any surprise. Small things planted earlier pay off here too, and a careful eye catches them on a rewatch. Long before the field, the two detectives talked about their guns, and Somerset admitted that in all his years he had never once fired his weapon at a person, while Mills had. At the time, it sounded like a small character detail, a difference between a cautious old cop and a hot-headed young one. In the field, it becomes prophecy. Somerset, the man who never fires, only fires a warning shot to stop the van. Mills, the man who has fired before, is the one who empties his gun into the killer. The film told the truth about how this would end, in a quiet conversation hours earlier, and only a second viewing reveals that the seeds of the ending were planted that early. The light itself is part of the cruelty, and it ties back to the very shape of the film. For nearly the entire movie, the world is dark and rain-soaked, and bright daylight is held back, never quite arriving. It finally arrives here, in this field, for the worst moment of the whole story. The film saved its only real sunshine for its bleakest scene, so that the light and the horror would land together. A viewer who has seen the film before understands this on a deep level. The appearance of the open sky stops feeling like relief and starts feeling like a warning, because the film taught, scene by scene, that in this world, the light is not where safety lives. The light is where the truth comes out, and the truth is unbearable. The field, then, is where every thread the film has been pulling finally ties off. The killer patience, his hidden presence, his careful and meaningful murders, his blank and nameless self, the warm wife and the secret she carried. All of it converges on one box, in one field, under one pale sky. And on the moment a good man is broken on purpose by a man who planned it all. It is an ending with almost no mercy in it, and it is built so carefully that it only grows heavier and clearer the more it is studied. The shock fades with each viewing. What rises in its place is something quieter and harder to shake. A full understanding of just how completely the killer won, and just how much it cost. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And yet the film does not leave its viewer with only the killer victory. It leaves them with an old man standing in a field, choosing, against all the evidence he has just witnessed, to stay and keep fighting for a world that has shown him its very worst. That choice, small and uncertain as it is, raises the question the whole film has been circling from its first frame. Whether a place this dark is truly worth fighting for at all, and what it means that the wisest, most worn-down person in the story decides that it is. The answer the film reaches for in its final moments is worth sitting with closely, because it is the one fragile piece of meaning left standing after everything else has been taken away. Section 8. The Long Way Out of the Dark. The last words of the film belong to Somerset, spoken over the final images as the police lights flash and his broken partner is taken away. He says that someone once wrote that the world is a fine place and worth fighting for. Then he adds that he agrees with the second part. That single line carries the entire weight of everything the film has tried to say, and it is built with great care. Somerset does not claim the world is fine. He has just watched it produce a monster who won, watched it swallow a kind young woman and her unborn child, watched it break a good man into pieces. He cannot call a place like that fine, and he does not. What he holds on to is smaller and stranger. The world may be ugly, he is saying. It may be cruel and rotten and full of horror, and still, it might be worth fighting for anyway. He keeps the fighting and lets go of the fineness. That careful split is easy to rush past on a first viewing, when the mind is still reeling from the field and the box and the gunshots. The line sounds like a sad little note of hope to close out a brutal story, and the credits roll before there is time to really weigh it. On a later viewing, with the shock gone, the line opens up. It is not a cheerful ending. It is a stubborn one. Somerset is not saying things will get better. He is saying he will stay anyway, fight anyway, try anyway, with no promise that any of it will matter. That kind of hope, hope with its eyes fully open to how bad things are, is the only kind the film is willing to offer, and it is far harder and far more honest than the easy comfort most movies hand out. To understand why that line lands the way it does, the whole shape of Somerset has to be seen. From the very first scene, he is a man trying to leave. He is days from retirement, and he wants out. Not just out of the job, but out of the city. Out of the whole grinding machine of human cruelty he has spent his career staring into. He plans to move somewhere quiet and far away, somewhere the rot of the city cannot reach him. He has seen too much. He has lost his faith in the place and in the people in it. And he has decided that the only sane response is to walk away while he still can. Everything about him in the early film is the posture of a man with one foot already out the door. The film shows his weariness in small, quiet ways that reward a careful eye. He cannot sleep in the city without help, so he keeps a small ticking device by his bed, a steady mechanical beat that he uses to drown out the noise of the streets outside. The sound of the world keeps him awake, so he covers it with a sound of his own. A tiny act of shutting the world out just so he can rest. On a first viewing, the ticking is just an odd habit, a bit of character color. On a later viewing, it is a perfect picture of who he is. A man so worn down by the chaos around him that he has to block it out by force every single night just to find a few hours of peace. He has been quietly withdrawing from the world for a long time, one night at a time. There is a moment early in the film that frames everything that follows, and it lives in a book. Somerset, trying to understand the killer obsession with sin, spends time reading the old writings on the subject, the centuries-old ideas about human failing and punishment that the killer is using as his guide. In that reading, a line surfaces, a piece of old poetry that says the way out of hell is long and hard, and that it leads upward, toward the light. It is dropped quietly, almost in passing, but it sits over the entire film like a label. The story is about to descend into a kind of hell, a dark and rain-soaked world where evil wins, and the line warns that there is no quick or easy escape from such a place. The only way out is long and hard and uphill. And most of the film is the descent rather than the climb. That old line connects directly to Somerset's final choice, and the connection only becomes clear once the film has been seen whole. Somerset wanted the easy way out. He wanted to leave, to retire, to escape the hell of the city for a quiet life somewhere clean. What he learns, through the horror of the case and the destruction of his partner, is that leaving is not really an escape. Walking away does not fix anything. It just hands the world over to the killers and the cruelty without a fight. So at the end, standing in the wreckage of everything, he chooses the long and hard way instead. He chooses to stay, to keep working, to keep climbing the uphill road out of the dark, even though he knows how steep it is and how little reward waits at the top. The man who spent the whole film trying to flee decides, at the worst possible moment, to remain. Mills travels the opposite road, and the two paths crossing is the quiet tragedy underneath the loud one. Mills begins the film as the believer. He is young, eager, sure that the work matters, sure that he can make a difference. The kind of man who moved to a hard city on purpose because he wanted to be where the fight was. He has the faith that Somerset has lost. He argues with the older man precisely because he still believes the world can be pushed in a better direction by people who try hard enough. Over the course of the film, that faith is tested, and in the field, it is destroyed completely. The idealist is broken. The believer becomes a killer. By the end, Mills has lost everything that made him who he was, while Somerset, the cynic, has found just enough reason to stay. They pass each other going in opposite directions, one falling into darkness as the other turns, however slightly, back toward the light. That crossing raises the hardest question the film asks, and it is a question with no comfortable answer. Did the killer win the argument? His whole plan was built to prove a point about the world, that under the surface people are weak and rotten and capable of monstrous things if pushed hard enough. He set out to prove it on the most decent young man he could find, and he succeeded. He took an idealist and turned him into a murderer in a field. By that measure, the killer won completely. He proved his ugly idea true with his own death, smiling on the inside as the bullets hit him, certain that he had shown the world its real face. The film does not let him have the last word, though, and that is where Somerset comes in. If the killer point were simply true, if people really were rotten all the way down, then the right move would be Somerset's original plan, to give up and walk away and let the world stew in its own filth. But Somerset does not do that. Having watched the killer win, having seen the very worst that people can do, he still chooses to stay and fight for the place. His choice is the film-quiet argument against the killer. It says that even if the world is as dark as the killer claims, even if cruelty wins and good people break, the response that matters is to keep trying anyway. The killer proved that a man can be broken. Somerset answers without quite saying it out loud, that a man can also choose not to quit. The argument is not settled cleanly. The film lets both answers stand, the killer victory and Somerset's stubbornness side by side, and leaves the viewer to sit with the tension between them. How dark the film truly is has been argued over since it came out, and a piece of its history makes the question sharper. Before David Fincher took the job, the chance to direct this film was offered to other talented filmmakers, and at least one of them turned it down, specifically because of how bleak and hopeless its view of the world was. That director was a man known for finding beauty and wonder even in dark stories, and he felt that this script vision of a rotten, hopeless world clashed too deeply with his own, more hopeful way of seeing things. He passed on it for that reason. The film that got made is the film that a more optimistic artist felt he could not bring himself to make, which says a great deal about just how dark its bones really are.
Fincher, coming off a miserable experience on his first film, wanted to make something uncompromising, something that would not soften itself to make audiences comfortable. And the bleakness that scared off another director was exactly what drew him in. All of that history points to a film that was built, on purpose, to look the darkness in the eye without flinching. It does not offer easy comfort. It does not punish the villain or reward the heroes or tie things up the way audiences are trained to expect. It lets evil win and lets good people lose. And it asks the viewer to sit in that discomfort rather than escape it. The only relief it allows is Somerset's thin, stubborn hope at the very end. And even that is offered without any promise that the fight he is choosing can be won. The film earns its darkness honestly, and it refuses to apologize for it. The meaning of all this is the part that deepens most on a rewatch, in a way that runs alongside the dread rather than against it. The first time through, the film is an experience to survive. A steady build of tension and horror that ends in a gut punch and leaves the viewer stunned. There is no room in that first run to weigh what any of it means. The shocks are too big and come too fast. On a second or third viewing, with the story fully known, the mind is freed up to think rather than just react, and the questions the film is really asking come into focus. What is the right way to live in a world that can produce a man like the killer? Is it better to stay and fight, or to protect yourself and leave? Can hope survive in a place that hands its worst people their victories? These questions were always there, buried under the suspense, and only the calm of a repeat viewing lets them rise to the surface. The arcs of the two detectives, in particular, only become fully visible once the ending is known. On a first viewing, Mills is mostly the hot-headed young partner, and Somerset is mostly the wise old one, and their differences read as the usual mismatched cop dynamic. On a later viewing, knowing where each man ends up, every scene between them becomes a quiet argument about how to face a broken world, with each man living out a different answer. The early conversations, the disagreements about whether the work matters, the small clashes of faith and doubt, all of it becomes the setup for the great reversal at the end. The film was telling the story of these two opposite roads the whole time, and the first viewing is too busy with the plot to notice. The meaning was always there, woven into the talk and the silences, waiting for a viewer calm enough to see it. Somerset metronome, his reading, his weariness, his desire to flee, all of these details that seem like simple character, color the first time, become the careful groundwork for his final choice on a rewatch. The film did not have him change his mind on a whim at the end. It built his entire journey across the whole runtime, showing a man worn down to the edge of giving up,
so that his decision to stay would mean something. A viewer who knows the ending can watch that groundwork being laid from the first scene, can see the long, slow road that leads Somerset from wanting out to choosing to stay. The choice that feels almost sudden on a first viewing feels earned and inevitable on a second, because all the steps are visible. This is the strange gift hidden inside the film darkness. Most stories that get darker on a rewatch do so only by piling on more dread, more grief, more horror, as the clues and meanings come clear. This film does that, scene after scene, exactly as the title promises. But underneath the growing darkness, something else grows too. The film gets richer. It gets more thoughtful. The questions it raises get harder and more interesting. And the small flicker of hope at the end gets more moving, precisely because the viewer now understands how much darkness it is standing against. The dread and the meaning grow together, hand in hand, so that each viewing is both heavier and deeper than the last. That is why so many people return to this film, even knowing how much it hurts. A story that only hurt would be watched once and avoided forever. This story rewards the return. It hands over more of its design, more of its meaning, more of its quiet argument about how to live every single time. The darkness draws a person back, and the meaning gives them something to hold once they arrive. Somerset choosing to stay in a world that has shown him its worst is, in the end, a small mirror of what the film asks of its audience. It is a hard, dark place to spend a few hours, and it offers no easy comfort. And still, there is something in it worth coming back to fight your way through again. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. None of that depth would land, though, if the film did not work so completely as a piece of craft. The dread that builds with each viewing does not come from the story alone. It comes from how the film looks, how it sounds, how the rain never stops and the rooms stay dim and the worst things are always kept just out of sight. Every one of those choices was made on purpose, by people who knew exactly what they were doing, and almost none of it happened by accident. The way the film was built, frame by frame and sound by sound, is its own hidden layer. And the fact that this entire bleak and uncompromising vision ever reached the screen at all was far from certain. The story of how the film was made and how close it came to never existing in this form is the next thread worth pulling. Section 9. How the darkness was built. The dread that grows with each viewing does not live only in the story. It is baked into the way the film looks and the way it sounds, into thousands of small choices made by people who knew exactly what feeling they were chasing. The director, fresh off a painful first film where he had been overruled at every turn, came to this one determined to make something that did not soften itself for anyone. When he sat down with the man in charge of shooting the film, the instruction he gave was simple. It had to be scary. That one word shaped everything. Not scary like a jump in the dark, but scary like a sick feeling that never fully goes away. A sense that the whole world of the film is rotting from the inside. Every choice about light and color and sound was bent toward that single goal. The most obvious of those choices is the rain. It falls through nearly the entire film, hard and constant, soaking the streets and the people and the crime scenes until the whole world seems waterlogged and miserable. Most viewers remember the rain as one of the first things about the film, and they assume it was simply there to set a gloomy mood. The mood is real, but the rain was also there for a plain, practical reason. The lead actor was only available for a limited stretch of days, with no room to push the schedule if something went wrong, so the filmmakers could not afford to let real weather ruin a shot. By making their own rain with machines, scene after scene, they could keep every outdoor moment looking the same, no matter what the sky was doing. A problem of scheduling became one of the most powerful tools in the film. A constant downpour that makes the city feel like it is drowning in its own filth. The rain is only part of a larger trick the film plays with its setting.
The whole thing was shot in sunny, dry Los Angeles, one of the brightest cities in the country, and then dressed and lit to look like a grim, decaying place somewhere far away and far colder. The film never names the city, never puts it on a map, never lets a single famous landmark slip into the frame. The streets are kept anonymous, crowded with garbage and noise and worn-down buildings, so that the place could be anywhere and feels like a version of every bad part of every city at once. A viewer would never guess they were looking at the same sunny streets used in 1,000 cheerful movies, because every trace of that brightness was stripped away on purpose. The color of the film is where the darkness goes deepest, and it came from a careful choice in how the film was developed. The director wanted the movie to feel almost like an old black and white picture, even though it was shot in color. To get there, the team used a special way of treating the film during developing, a step that deepened all the dark parts of the image and drained much of the life out of the colors. The result is a world where the blacks are blacker than normal, where shadows feel heavy and thick, and where the colors that remain look faded and sickly, like something left out in bad weather for too long. Nothing in the film looks fresh or bright or healthy. The image itself seems to be decaying, matching the rot in the story. And that drained, heavy look settles over the viewer without them ever quite knowing why the film feels so unwell. The world of the film was built to match that sick image, by a team led by the man in charge of designing how everything looked. The idea behind the design was direct. The setting was meant to reflect the moral decay of the people living in it. So the streets are choked with trash. The rooms are cramped and stained. The public spaces feel worn and uncared for. And a general sense of falling apart hangs over every location. The crime scenes are the worst of it, dim and filthy and crowded with grim detail. Even the ordinary places, the police station, the apartments, the hallways, carry a tired, used-up feeling. The film does not have a single clean, hopeful-looking space until the very end out in the field. And that one bright space is saved for the worst moment of all. Everywhere else, the world looks as broken as the story being told inside it. The opening of the film, those slow hands working in close-up, has its own remarkable history, and it nearly did not exist at all. The director had first planned to open the film with a calm sequence of the older detective buying a quiet house in the country. A peaceful start before the horror began. That plan fell away because of money and time. And when the director needed something to put at the front of the film for an early showing to the studio, he turned to a designer who specialized in opening credits. Working with the killer prop journals, the same notebooks that appear later in the film, the designer built a short, frantic, unsettling sequence of those obsessive pages and disturbing images, cut together fast and set to a broken, scraping piece of music. The director was so struck by it that he asked for it to be expanded into the full opening the film now has. That opening did more than set the mood for one movie. It changed the way opening credits were made across the whole industry. Before it, the credits at the start of a film were mostly just names on a screen, a thing to sit through before the story began. This sequence turned the credits into a piece of storytelling all on their own, a window straight into the killer mind before the audience even knew there was a killer. It was praised as a real step forward in filmmaking, and countless films and television shows in the years after copied its frantic, handmade, unsettling style. A piece of last-minute filler
made because a better-funded plan fell through, became one of the most copied openings ever put on film. On a rewatch, knowing those hands belong to the killer, the sequence is chilling. Knowing it was almost never made at all, it becomes a small miracle of good luck born from a budget problem. Sound is another place where the film does its quiet work, and much of its power comes from how little it uses. Many films lean hard on background music, swelling strings and pounding drums that tell the audience exactly how to feel in every scene. This film mostly refuses that. Its background music is sparse, often absent, leaving long stretches carried by nothing but the sound of the rain, the hum of the city, the small noises of rooms and footsteps and breathing. When music does appear, it is often a real song playing in the world of the film rather than a score laid over the top. An old tune on a record or the radio. The broken, scraping piece in the opening is one of the few moments the sound turns truly aggressive, and it stands out precisely because the rest of the film is so restrained. By keeping the music thin and letting the real sounds of the grim world fill the space, the film feels less like a movie telling the viewer what to feel and more like a real place the viewer has been dropped into. That realness is a big part of why it sinks in so deep. The camera itself follows a hidden rule that most viewers feel without noticing. For nearly the entire film, the camera is steady and controlled, moving with calm, deliberate purpose. Never shaky, never frantic. That steadiness matches the way the killer controls everything. The sense that there is a careful, patient mind arranging every piece. There are only 2 moments in the whole film where that control breaks, and the camera suddenly goes shaky and handheld, lurching along with the action. One is the desperate foot chase through the rain when the detectives nearly catch the killer and lose him. The other is the final scene in the field. Those are the only 2 moments in the film where no single mind is fully in control of what happens, where chaos takes over and the outcome is up for grabs. The camera tells the audience this without a word, by staying calm everywhere the killer is in command and going wild only in the 2 places where the plan could break. A first-time viewer never notices the pattern. A careful rewatch reveals that even the steadiness of the camera was a choice, tied to who holds the power in each scene. Some of the film realness came from accidents that the filmmakers chose to keep. During that frantic chase scene in the rain, the lead actor slipped and drove his arm through a car windshield, cutting himself so badly that the wound went deep all the way down. The injury was real and serious. Rather than hide it or work around it, the filmmakers wrote it into the story so that the character carries a hurt arm through the back half of the film. The cast and bandage the audience sees in later scenes are covering a real wound the actor really suffered. On a rewatch, knowing this, those later scenes carry an extra weight because the pain on screen is not entirely acting. The film took a real piece of bad luck and folded it into the story so smoothly that most viewers never know the difference, which is its own kind of craft. The willingness to bend the plan around whatever the real world threw at it. The film's greatest trick, the one that ties all the craft together, is how much it refuses to show. The murders themselves almost never appear on screen. The audience sees the staged rooms afterward, the terrible results, but rarely the acts themselves. The contents of the box in the final scene are never shown at all. Over and over, the film stops just short of the worst image and lets the imagination finish the job. This is a choice, and a brave one, because the easy path in a dark film is to show everything and shock the audience with images. The harder and smarter path is to suggest, to imply, to let the viewer mind build the horror out of hints and reactions. A built-up horror in the imagination is always worse than anything a camera could show, and it never wears out. An image seen on screen loses a little power each time it is watched. A horror the viewer pictures themselves stays fresh and awful no matter how many times the film is run, because the mind rebuilds it new every time. That choice is the deepest reason the film grows heavier with each viewing rather than lighter. A film that showed all its horrors would slowly lose its grip, because the shock of seen images fades with repetition. This film keeps its worst moments off the screen and inside the head, where they cannot be worn down. The drained, sick color, the endless rain, the anonymous, rotting city, the thin and realistic sound, the steady camera that breaks only into chaos, the willingness to hide the worst images. All of it works together to create a feeling rather than just a series of events. And a feeling, once it gets into a person, does not fade the way a plot twist does. The craft makes the dread permanent. None of this was a sure thing. The whole bleak vision, the refusal to comfort the audience, the willingness to let evil win, made the people funding the film deeply nervous. The studio worried about how dark it was, worried about whether audiences would accept an ending with no justice in it, worried right up to the end, and pushed for changes that would have softened the blow. The film that exists, in all its uncompromising gloom, survived only because a handful of people refused to let it be made safe. It came very close to being a different, gentler, lesser film. The kind that explains away its darkness and hands the audience an easy way out. The version that got made kept its darkness whole. The gamble paid off in a way almost no one expected. The film that the studio feared was too dark to sell became an enormous success, one of the biggest hits of its year, pulling in many times what it cost to make. Audiences did not turn away from the bleakness. They were gripped by it. The film that another director had turned down for being too hopeless, that the studio had fought against for being too grim, found a massive audience precisely because it refused to pretend the world was nicer than it is. People felt the honesty of it, the way it took its own darkness seriously, and they rewarded it. The uncompromising version won, both as a piece of art and as a success, proving that audiences were hungrier for something real and dark than the people in charge had ever believed. Seeing all of this craft laid bare changes how the film feels on a rewatch, in a way that runs right alongside the growing dread. The first time through, none of these choices are visible as choices. The rain just falls. The world just looks sick. The music is just thin. The camera just moves, and the worst things just happen off screen. The viewer feels the dread without seeing how it was made. On a later viewing, with the story known and the mind free to look closer, the machinery becomes visible. The deliberate rain, the drained color chosen on purpose, the steady camera that breaks only twice, the horrors kept just out of sight. Realizing that the sick, hopeless feeling of the film was engineered, frame by frame and sound by sound, by people chasing a single scary feeling, makes the film more impressive and, in a strange way, more unsettling. The darkness was not an accident of a grim story. It was built with care by people who knew exactly what they were doing, and that intention is its own quiet chill. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The care that went into building this single film did not stay contained to it. The look, the feeling, the willingness to sit in darkness without flinching, spread outward and shaped countless films and shows that came after. And it set the course for the director's own long career, sending him back again and again to stories about killers and the people who chase them. Decades later, the film casts a shadow over the whole genre it belongs to, and audiences keep choosing to walk back into its dark, rain-soaked world, even though they know exactly how much it is going to hurt. Why a film this bleak has lasted so long, and why people keep returning to it across the years, is the final piece worth understanding. Section 10. The Shadow It Cast. A film this dark could have come and gone, watched once and avoided forever, the way many grim movies are. Instead, it spread outward and changed the things around it. And decades later, its mark is everywhere in the kind of stories it belongs to. The look it created, the gritty, rain-soaked, drained-of-life world where a clever killer leaves clues for tired detectives, became a template that countless films and television shows have copied ever since. Before this film, serial killer stories had their own styles, but afterward, a whole flood of them chased the same heavy gloom, the same dim rooms and grimy cities and morally exhausted cops. The film set a new standard for how dark a popular thriller could be and still draw a huge audience. And the people who made the films that came after took notes. The opening of the film, that frantic handmade sequence of the killer journals, had an outsized influence all on its own. It turned the opening credits of a film into a piece of storytelling rather than a list of names to sit through. And the style it introduced, fast and scratchy and unsettling, showed up again and again in the years that followed. Crime shows on television in particular borrowed that jittery, disturbing opening look so often that it became a kind of shorthand for darkness and danger. A piece of last-minute filler, made because a more expensive plan fell through, ended up teaching an entire industry a new way to begin a story. The man who made it went on to a long career building openings for major films, his style so distinctive that it became instantly recognizable. The film shaped its own director path more than anything else. Coming off a miserable first film that nearly drove him out of the business, he made this one his statement, the film that proved what he could do when no one softened his vision. It worked, and it set the course for everything after. Again and again across his career, he returned to the same kind of territory, to killers and the people who hunt them, to dark crimes studied with cold patience. He made a film about a real killer who terrorized a city and was never caught, a slow and obsessive picture about the toll the chase takes on the people who give their lives to it. He made another about a damaged investigator chasing a different kind of monster. He created a television series built entirely around the careful study of killers and what makes them tick, the patient work of getting inside minds that should not make sense. The fascination that runs through all of it was lit, in large part, by this one film, the one that showed him what his talent was for. The connection ran so deep that many years later, he made a film with the same writer who had dreamed up this story in the first place. The young man who had written this bleak tale, working a record store job and pouring his dark mood onto the page, went on to a long career of his own. And decades after their first collaboration, the two reunited on another cold, careful study of a killer. The thread that began with a depressed clerk writing about sin in a small apartment ran all the way through both their careers, tying their later work back to the film that started it. What began as one struggling writer attempt to channel his own gloom became the seed of a body of work that has shaped the dark side of popular film for 30 years. For the actors, the film was a turning point too. The young lead, who plays the doomed idealist detective, had come up through lighter, prettier roles, the kind that traded on his looks more than his depth. This film let him do something rawer and more painful, and he has since credited it with reviving his love of acting itself, with reminding him why the work mattered to him. The role asked him to go to a place of total devastation in that final field, to play a man broken beyond repair, and he met it. The film did not just use his fame. It deepened what audiences understood he could do, and it pointed his career toward braver and stranger choices in the years that followed. The way the film has been judged over time tells its own story. When it first came out, the reviews were strong, though not without argument. One of the most respected critics of the era gave it high marks while still wrestling with how bleak it was, calling it a dark, grisly, horrifying, and intelligent piece of work. Clearly impressed and clearly disturbed in equal measure. That mix of admiration and unease was common at the time, and it has never fully gone away, because the film is built to leave people unsettled rather than satisfied. What has changed is its standing. In the decades since, it has climbed in the eyes of both critics and ordinary viewers, settling in as one of the most respected thrillers ever made. On the big ranking lists, where huge numbers of regular people vote on the films they love, it sits near the very top, year after year, holding its place among the greatest films of any kind. A movie that some worried was too dark to sell has become a permanent fixture on the lists of films people consider essential. Beyond the lists and the reviews, the film burrowed into the wider culture in a way few films manage. Its ending, and one line in particular from that final scene, became famous far beyond the people who actually watched the movie. The image of a man in a field, frantic, demanding to know what is inside a plain cardboard box, has been repeated, joked about, and referenced so many times that even people who have never seen the film recognize it. That is a strange kind of fame, the kind where a moment escapes its movie and floats free in the culture, known to people who could not name the film it came from. It is proof of how hard the ending hit. A scene has to land with enormous force to break loose like that and live on its own for decades. Many films tried to copy what this one did, and most of them fell short. And the reason they fell short reveals what made the original special. The imitators copied the surface. They borrowed the gloomy look, the rain, the grimy cities, the clever killers and tired detectives. What most of them could not copy was the restraint. They showed too much. They put their horrors right on the screen, gory and complete. And they explained their killers with neat, tidy backstories that drained away the mystery. The original film succeeded precisely because it held back, because it kept its worst images in the imagination and left its killer unexplained, a blank that the mind could never quite close. The copies gave audiences everything, and so gave them nothing to keep thinking about. The original gave them less on the surface and far more underneath, which is why it lasted while so many of its imitators faded. That restraint connects directly to the deepest reason the film has endured, the reason it keeps drawing people back across the years. It does not get used up. A film that delivers all its shocks on the surface tends to wear thin, because once the surprises are known, there is little reason to return. This film works in the opposite direction. Its real power lives beneath the surface, in the design, the meaning, the small details, the questions it refuses to answer cleanly. And all of that grows richer the more it is studied. The first viewing is a shock. Every viewing after is a deepening. The story does not change, but the understanding does. And the understanding keeps yielding more, no matter how many times a person returns. A film built that way has no shelf life. It is as alive on the 10th viewing as the first,
and arguably more so. This is the quiet engine behind everything the film has become. The reason it shaped a genre. The reason it shaped a career. The reason it climbed the lists and lodged in the culture. All of it traces back to the simple fact that the film rewards attention. It was made by people chasing a single feeling, built with care in every frame and every sound, and stuffed with design that only reveals itself slowly. A viewer who watches once gets a powerful, disturbing experience. A viewer who watches again and again gets something closer to a relationship with the film. A sense of always finding one more thing, one more echo, one more piece of the puzzle clicking into place. That kind of film does not fade from memory. It keeps calling people back, and each time it gives them a reason to have come. The years have only made that pull stronger. Long after its release, the film has been brought back to theaters and screens in fresh, restored versions, polished up so that new generations can see it the way it was meant to be seen, on the biggest and clearest screens available. Each time it returns, a new wave of viewers discovers it, people who were not even born when it first came out, and they have the same experience their parents had. The shock of that ending, the slow, dawning dread, the pull to watch it again and look closer. A film that captured something true about darkness, and about how darkness is best shown, does not age the way flashier films do. It stays relevant because the thing it understood, that the worst horrors live in the imagination, and that an unexplained evil is the most frightening kind, does not go out of date. There is something telling in the choice people make to return to it. This is not a comforting film. It does not send anyone away feeling good. It ends with evil triumphant, a good man destroyed, and only the thinnest thread of stubborn hope left standing in the wreckage. And yet, people choose to walk back into that dark world, knowing exactly how much it will hurt, knowing the box is coming, and the field is coming, and the loss is coming. They go back because the hurt is honest, because the film respects them enough to tell a hard truth without flinching, and because every return reveals a little more of how carefully the whole thing was made. The willingness to revisit pain in search of understanding is a rare thing for a film to earn, and this one earns it. All of this is the long shadow the film casts, and it is a shadow shaped exactly like the film itself, dark and deliberate and impossible to shake. It changed how dark thrillers look and how their stories begin. It pointed a major director toward the work that would define him. It revived an actor love of his craft and gave a writer career its foundation. It climbed from a film some feared was too bleak to sell into one of the most respected and most rewatched thrillers ever made. And it left a single image lodged so deep in the culture that it outgrew the movie entirely. Every piece of that legacy grows from the same root. The fact that the film was built to be looked at closely, again and again, and to give back more each time. The biggest rewards of that close looking are the famous ones. The killer hidden at the crime scene, the meaning of the surrender, the weight of the box. Underneath those large revelations, though, the film is stitched together with dozens of much smaller touches, tiny details and quiet echoes that most people never catch even after several viewings. A line of dialogue that secretly matches a private entry in the killer journals. A name spoken aloud only once, at the exact right moment, by a man who never says it any other time. A first and only time a character does a particular thing, placed precisely where it will mean the most. These small stitches are easy to miss and easy to overlook,
And they are where some of the film's finest and most careful work is hidden, waiting for the kind of viewer who has come back enough times to finally notice them. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.